Hello students, today we are going to critically discuss the poem I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Let's discuss the objectives first. By the end of this session, you will be able to understand the poem critically and you will also be able to understand the theme of the poem. Now take out your treasure trove poetry workbook. At page 107, poem number 7, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Now let's discuss about the poet, Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou was an African-American poet and civil rights activist. She tried her hand at diverse professions in her life. She was an actor, writer, director, and producer of plays, movies, and television shows. She was a professor at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. She published 7 autobiographies, 3 books of essays, several collections of poems, and plays. Children, she was a champion of civil rights for black people and women. The first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is focused on her life up to the age of 17 and brought her international repute and acclaim. Acclaim means praise. The title of this autobiography and one of her poems comes from the 3rd stanza of the poem Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar. This you have done in your 7th standard. In 1993, she recited her poem On the Pulse of Morning at President Bill Clinton's inauguration. She received a number of awards and honorary degrees, and in 1999, she was quoted saying, I make writing as much a part of my life as I do eating or listening to music. This was all about Maya Angelou. Now children, let's discuss about the poem. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Angelou is one of her well-known and forceful poems that has universal appeal. In Angelou's times, children, African-American people did not feel free as there were still many restrictions on them in society. The poem gives expression to the feelings of these black Americans, rather of all the oppressed people in the world. Obviously, it deals explicitly, means clearly, and implicitly, means doubtlessly, with the problems related to race, gender, slavery, and freedom. So children, this poem deals with the problems related to racism, gender inequality, slavery, and freedom. This poem refers to 2 birds. One, trapped in a cage, and the other, free, swaying and flying with the wind. Children, the encaged bird stands for Black American and the free bird stands for White American. The free bird flies freely in the sky. It has a right to claim the sky as his own. As the white people, they were not imposed any restriction. They were free to move anywhere. Whereas the encaged bird, it is encaged in the bars of rage. It can hardly move in that cage. This caged bird is a metaphor for black Americans who were restricted. No freedom is available to an encaged bird. Similarly, no such freedom was given to black Americans. His dreams are entombed, but it does not give up. It does not give up singing or dreaming of freedom. So this bird has only right to open its mouth and sing and dreams of freedom. So children, this was all about the poem, and this poem also gives us a message that hopes lies eternal in human heart. Now children, let's discuss the theme of the poem. The first theme of the poem is racism. It is given on page number 110 in your book. Read there with me and write down the difficult meanings there, children. Maya Angelou herself experienced the worst form of racial discrimination. Racial means related to race and discrimination means prejudice. So children, in America, Maya Angelou has herself experienced the worst forms of racial discrimination. She felt that black Americans were not as free as they ought to be, as they had to be. So children, she felt that black Americans were not given basic rights. They were not free. they were denied basic rights. Children, they were even denied basic rights. There were number of restrictions on them in the society. So, in the society, there were number of restrictions imposed on African Americans. African Americans longed, means desired for freedom and equality. This longing for freedom is expressed in the poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So children, the poet presents two birds. One, the free bird, I have already told you, free bird, a metaphor for a white American. And second, the caged bird, metaphor for African American. So children, the contrast between the two underlines the plight, the means unfortunate situation of the encaged bird and his longing for freedom and equality. So children, this contrast, this opposite situation of freed bird and the caged bird, it shows us the unfortunate situation and the desire for freedom and equality of the caged bird. So children, despite restriction, this caged bird still sings of freedom. So, though this bird is restricted, but still he can sing, so he still sings for freedom. So, there are two lines from your text given here. His wings are clipped, his feet are tired, so he opens his throat to sing. So, nothing was left, he can do nothing, but still he can sing. So, this bird sings for freedom, though his feet are tired and his wings are clipped. So children, our next theme is yearning for freedom and equality. So children, another theme of this poem, yearning means wishing for freedom and equality. Who will yearn for freedom and equality? Our caged bird. So the poet rightly feels that the freedom is the birthright of every individual. So children, freedom is the birthright of every person. Whereas it is a natural state. So this is natural. Everybody deserves to be free in this world. Captivity. Captivity means state of being confined. So captivity is an abnormal state, children. No one likes to be in cage. Nobody would like to be confined. Even a bird doesn't. So children, as you all know, even a bird doesn't like to be in cage. African Americans voiced their protests against all forms of oppressions. Oppressions means cruel exercise of authority and exploitation. So children, African Americans, they raised their voice against oppressions and exploitation. They are unhappy in their narrow cage. They are unhappy because they were restricted, and which takes the form of racism, gender inequality and powerlessness. They were unhappy due to racism, gender inequality and powerlessness. The poet is now hopeful that the voice of the caged bird has begun to be heard far away, and now it can no longer be suppressed. Suppressed means forcibly put to an end. Now in the poem, the poet says, the caged bird sings with a fearful trill, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings for freedom. So he says in these lines that the caged bird has started singing in a fearful voice, and his song would be heard at the distant hill as the caged bird sings for freedom. Now children, let's discuss critical appreciation. The first heading under it is title. The title of the poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is linked to the main theme of the poem. So children, the title of this poem is directly linked to the main theme of this poem. It is the caged bird, a metaphor for the Black American or for any oppressed man or woman which remains under focus. So children, in this poem, we'll find that the caged bird is under focus, which is a metaphor for Black American or any oppressed man or woman. The poet presents the plight. Plight means unfortunate situation of those who are denied freedom and equality. So children, the poet has presented the plight, the unfortunate situation of those people who cannot have their freedom and equality. The caged bird, unlike the free bird, the caged bird which is not like the free bird which is a metaphor for white American. Free bird presents white American. The caged bird can only sing and dream of freedom. As the caged bird cannot do anything, it is restricted. It can hardly see through the bars of rage. And the only thing which caged bird can do is sing and dream of freedom. His wings are clipped and feet are chained. So the wings of the caged bird are clipped and feet are chained. So this bird cannot move How can he move? This bird can hardly move. So the feelings of this encaged bird are vividly, means clearly presented by the poet. So in this poem, the poet has presented the feelings of encaged bird. Thus, the title of this poem is apt and suggestive. Now children, another heading under critical appreciation is autobiographical overtones. Maya Angelou, herself a black, faced all kinds of discriminations in the South and elsewhere during her life. So children, Maya Angelou herself was black and she faced a lot of discriminations in the South and in other places in her life. The cage in her poem is associated with racism, sexism, insecurity, poverty and abuse. So children, the cage in this poem represents the discriminations based on racism, sexism, insecurity, abuse, etc. So these discriminatory forces continued to make her feel inferior. So children, she feel inferior. She continued to feel inferior because of these discriminations. She could not achieve what her white counterpart means mirror images. So children, write down meaning side by side. So she could not achieve what her white counterparts could achieve in such situations, in such circumstances and opportunities. Like the encaged bird, she was angry. She was also angry, like the encaged bird. She could do little, as the encaged bird can do only, she can only sing and dream of freedom. So she could also do little thing only, like the encaged bird in his narrow cell. But she voiced, what she did, she voiced her resentment. Resentment means hard feelings and longed for freedom. She also protested against such discriminations and she longed for freedom. In the poem, singing is all her bird can do. In this poem, we will find that the encaged bird can only sing. The poet hoped that the voice of the oppressed would be heard far away. So this poet hopes that the voice of such oppressed people would be heard far away, as it cannot be suppressed. We are reminded of these lines from Dunbar's poem, Sympathy. So there are few lines which we are reminded by this poet. I know why the caged bird beats his wings till its blood is red on the cruel bar. So these lines you have done in Sympathy poem. Now children, next heading under critical appreciation is universal appeal. It is important to read Angelou's poem in the broader context. So children, it is very important that we should know the broader context of this poem. Even though the context of the poem relates to the state of black Americans, in the wake of means as a consequence of, stark means severe racial discriminations practiced by whites, the metaphor of the caged bird is applicable to all those who are denied equal rights and opportunities to grow. So children, even though this poem relates to the state of black Americans, even though it shows the condition of the black Americans due to racial discriminations which are practiced by whites, still, the metaphor of the caged bird is applicable to all those also who are oppressed or who are denied equal rights and opportunities to grow. A person belonging to the backward stratum means level or class of life, or a woman or a laborer feels as much restricted and oppressed as the caged bird. So children, a person who belongs to backward stratum of life, be it a woman, be a laborer, they would feel restricted, they would feel oppressed as the caged bird felt. His struggle takes many forms. Sometimes it becomes violent. So his struggle takes many forms. He may sing for freedom. He may raise his voice against such discriminations. And sometimes it may become violent. So sadly, the free bird has his own sphere to operate and has no time or inclination, means interest, to help encaged bird. So children, free bird is in his own life. He doesn't have time. He doesn't have any interest to help the encaged bird. So children, this was all about the critical appreciation. This was your homework time, children. Now what you have to do, you have to read the summary and theme of the same poem from the workbook. Thank you, children, and have a nice day.